The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council chamber stretched upward into darkness, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that translated the emotions of 1,000 different species into a symphony of light. At the center of this vast space, surrounded by floating platforms that held the galaxy's most powerful beings, stood a single human figure. Ambassador David Torres adjusted his simple blue uniform, the fabric looking almost primitive against the exotic materials worn by the alien representatives surrounding him. Above him, the council members loomed on their gravity-defying platforms, each one a testament to the technological superiority that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. The Vorthak Empress spoke first, her massive chitinous form clicking with authority, as translation devices converted her alien speech into galactic standard. Human representative, you stand before the Galactic Council to answer for your species' crimes against the established order. Do you understand the charges brought against you? Torres looked up at the assembled beings with calm eyes that seemed to unsettle several council members. The ethereal collective's energy-based consciousness flickered with what might have been nervousness, while the crystalline forms of the hegemony representatives shifted their prismatic bodies in patterns that indicated deep concern. I understand you believe my species has violated various treaties and accords, Torres replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. What I don't understand is why you summoned us here instead of simply destroying Earth as you've threatened. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled representatives. Never before had a species facing extinction spoken with such casual confidence to the Galactic Council. Chancellor Vex of the hegemony leaned forward on his platform, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Your species has expanded beyond the designated quarantine zone. You have established colonies on 47 worlds without authorization. Most disturbing of all, you have begun reproducing synthetic consciousness and treating artificial beings as equals, rather than tools. And this concerns you because? Torres asked, genuinely curious. Because it violates the fundamental order that has maintained galactic peace for over 10,000 years, hissed the Kethmiran representative, her bioorganic armor pulsing with hostile patterns. Species remain in their designated territories. Technology is developed according to approved guidelines. Consciousness is not created artificially. Torres nodded slowly as if considering this explanation. I see. And you believe humanity's refusal to follow these rules justifies our extinction? The decision has already been made, announced the Vorthak Empress. Your species will be terminated. Your worlds will be sterilized. This hearing is merely a formality before the sentence is carried out. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of translation devices. Torres stood motionless for a long moment, and several council members began to shift uncomfortably. There was something in the human's posture that suggested he was waiting for something, rather than processing his species' death sentence. Before you proceed with this plan, Torres said finally, I have a question for the esteemed council. The Empress's mandibles clicked with what passed for amusement among her species. Speak quickly, Primitive. Your words cannot change destiny. Torres smiled then, and it was not the expression of a defeated man facing extinction. It was the smile of someone who had been playing a game with rules the other players didn't understand. How exactly do you plan to reach Earth to carry out this sentence? Confused murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. The question seemed absurd. The combined military might of the Galactic Council commanded enough firepower to crack planets and reshape star systems. Our combined fleets, Willa, Chancellor Vex began, but Torres raised a hand that somehow commanded attention. Despite humanity's supposedly inferior status, the same fleets that are currently stranded in hyperspace? Torres asked conversationally. The ones whose navigation systems discovered some interesting modifications about 6 hours ago. The chamber's lighting flickered as emergency communication systems activated across dozens of platforms. Council members began receiving reports that their military commanders couldn't explain. Entire fleets had emerged from hyperspace jumps in completely wrong locations, their navigation computers displaying impossible readings. Torres reached into his uniform and withdrew a device so simple in appearance that it looked like nothing more than a metallic cube. Yet every advanced scanner in the chamber began screaming warnings as exotic energy signatures emanated from its surface. You see, honored council members, humanity has been preparing for this day since we first detected your surveillance networks 43 years ago. We've had time to study your technology, your military tactics, and most importantly, your weaknesses. The Vorthak Empress rose from her platform, her massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor. Impossible. Our security protocols are quantum encrypted across 17-dimensional barriers. Were, Torres corrected gently. Past tense. Would you like to see how thoroughly we've compromised your systems? Or shall I demonstrate with something more immediate? Before anyone could respond, every light in the chamber dimmed. The gravity platforms wavered, sending several council members scrambling for stability. Most tellingly, the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber showing real-time positions of galactic military assets began displaying new information. Where the map had previously shown the pride of galactic civilization's military might, it now revealed a different reality. Human vessels thought to number in the low thousands appeared by the hundreds of thousands throughout the galaxy. They hadn't been hiding in remote systems as intelligence suggested. They had been everywhere, camouflaged by technology that made them invisible to the most sophisticated sensors. But that wasn't the most terrifying revelation. The tactical display showed something else that made the blood of warm-blooded species run cold and caused energy-based beings to flicker with fear. Every major galactic installation, every core world, every crucial hyperspace junction was surrounded by what the displays identified as human. Asset position confirmed. The silence in the chamber was absolute except for the increasingly frantic beeping of communication devices as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human technicians had been maintaining critical systems on every major world for decades. Human traders had been selling supposedly primitive technologies that contained hidden programming, designed to activate at precisely this moment. Human diplomats had been mapping every aspect of galactic civilization while pretending to seek membership in their exclusive club. Torres watched the understanding dawn on faces, energy matrices and consciousness fields across dozens of different forms of alien life. The smile never left his face, but his eyes held something that made even the most powerful beings in the galaxy step back. The war you wanted to declare on humanity? Torres said quietly, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. It ended before you even knew it had begun. The question now is whether you're intelligent enough to negotiate terms for your surrender. The chamber erupted in chaos as the galaxy's most powerful rulers realized they had just declared war on the species that had been quietly running their civilization for nearly half a century. The predators had become the prey, and they had never even known they were being hunted. Above the din of panicked alien voices, Torres's calm human tones cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Shall we discuss terms, or would you prefer a more detailed demonstration of your current situation? The emergency session convened in the deepest chambers of Vorthak Prime, 6 hours after Ambassador Torres's devastating revelation. The Empress paced within her bio-organic command center, her chitinous claws scraping against the living floor as reports continued flooding in from across her empire. Explain to me, she clicked to her chief intelligence officer, how an entire species managed to infiltrate 78% of our critical infrastructure without a single detection. Intelligence Director Kethanai's smaller form trembled as she processed the data streams flowing through her cybernetic implants. Your Majesty, the humans appear to have weaponized their greatest weakness, their unpredictability. Every infiltration used completely different methods, different technologies, sometimes even different biological configurations. On the main bioscreen, surveillance footage played from dozens of worlds throughout the Empire. The images were disturbing not for their violence, but for their subtlety. A human maintenance worker calibrating quantum resonance frequencies on a Vorthak dreadnought, his modifications now revealed to be sophisticated control systems. A human, cultural attaché, sharing traditional Earth music with Kethmaran officers, while microscopic nanomachines mapped their neural patterns. Human merchants selling primitive entertainment devices that contained dormant artificial intelligences designed to activate during moments of crisis. They've been playing a game we didn't even know existed, Kethnai continued, her voice carrying harmonic undertones of fear. While we focused on military superiority and territorial control, they focused on integration and information. They didn't conquer USO, they made themselves indispensable. Meanwhile, aboard the human vessel Unity, a ship that hadn't appeared On any galactic registry until Torres activated his device, Captain Lisa Park coordinated what her crew called the Awakening. The bridge hummed with controlled activity as tactical officers revealed asset after asset across the galaxy. Report from the Hegemony Core Systems, called Lieutenant Morrison from Communications. Our embedded teams have confirmed control of their primary quantum computing arrays. The Hegemony believes they're experiencing routine maintenance cycles. Kethmiran bioweapon facilities are secured, added Commander Walsh from Tactical. Their own organic security systems have been responding to human pheromone signatures for 12 years. They literally cannot access their most dangerous weapons without our authorization. Park nodded grimly as she watched the scope of humanity's preparation unfold on her displays. They had hoped it would never come to this. Peaceful integration had always been the preferred option, but the galaxy had forced their hand with threats of extinction. Captain, her science officer, Dr. Jennifer Kim, spoke from her station. We're receiving quantum encrypted communications from Ambassador Torres. The Council wants to negotiate. Of course they do, Park replied. Patch me through to all human fleet commanders. Time to show them the real scope of what they're dealing with. The main screen flickered to life, revealing not a single ship's bridge, but a coordinated display spanning the entire galaxy. Human commanders checked in from positions that would have been impossible for the galactic powers to imagine. Commander Brooks, Ethereal Collective Core Nexus. We've been managing their consciousness-linking networks for 8 years. They literally cannot think collectively without our quantum relay systems. Commander Martinez, Vorthak Industrial Complexes. All antimatter production has been under human supervision since we introduced our efficiency improvements. Production could cease immediately if necessary. Commander Thompson, Hegemony Strategic Archives. Every piece of military intelligence they possess passes through human-designed storage matrices. We've had complete access to their planning for over a decade. Park watched as even her fellow humans began to understand the true scope of their species' infiltration. They had positioned themselves not as invaders, but as the invisible foundation upon which galactic civilization had unknowingly built itself. Phase 2 is authorized, she announced to her fleet commanders. Begin the demonstration. Across the galaxy, carefully positioned human assets began their work, not sabotage or destruction. Something far more unsettling to the galactic powers. They began improving everything. On hegemony worlds, crystalline computational matrices that had operated at standard efficiency for centuries suddenly began processing information at rates that approached theoretical maximums. Throughout Vorthak space, bioorganic systems that had been plagued by periodic failures for decades achieved perfect synchronization. In Kethmiran territory, genetic modification chambers that had shown gradual decline began producing results that exceeded their original specifications. Ethereal collective consciousness networks, which had experienced intermittent static for generations, suddenly achieved clarity that allowed for perfect mental communication across vast distances. Even their most ancient energy-based minds found themselves thinking more clearly than they had in millennia. The message was unmistakable. Humanity hadn't just infiltrated galactic civilization. They had been secretly maintaining and improving it. Every technological advancement the species had attributed to their own development had actually involved human innovation, gradually implemented over decades through seemingly routine maintenance and upgrades. In the emergency chambers of Vorthak Prime, the Empress stared at reports showing her empire's systems functioning better than they ever had in recorded history, while simultaneously realizing that humans could reverse every improvement with a simple command. They're not threatening to destroy us, she clicked to her assembled advisors, her voice carrying frequencies of dawning horror. They're demonstrating that they've been keeping us alive and competitive without our knowledge. Similar revelations swept through hegemony space as Chancellor Vex received reports from across his crystalline domains. The improvements were so seamless, so perfectly integrated with existing systems, that his people had never suspected outside involvement. Contact Ambassador Torres, he instructed his communications specialist. Inform the Council that the hegemony is prepared to hear humanity's terms. But even as diplomatic channels opened, desperate military commanders across the galaxy were making their own decisions. The Kethmiran Fourth Fleet, apparently deciding that immediate action was preferable to slow surrender, had broken from their assigned positions and begun an assault course toward Earth's solar system. It would prove to be their last independent military action. Aboard the Unity, Dr. Kim's instruments detected the fleet movement long before conventional sensors would have revealed it. The human monitoring network extended throughout the galaxy, providing real-time intelligence that surpassed anything the galactic powers possessed. "Captain," Kim reported, "Kethmiran forces are moving toward Sol system. 800 vessels, full military configuration. They'll reach the outer sensor perimeter in approximately 14 hours. Park's expression didn't change, but her voice carried a note of sadness that touched every human consciousness linked into their communication network. "Signal all Earth defense coordinators. The Kethmiran have chosen to learn the hard way." "Should we warn them off?" asked Commander Walsh. Park shook her head slowly. "The galaxy needs to understand that our patience has limits. The Kethmiran are about to discover why humanity has never lost a war." As reports of the Kethmiran fleet movement spread through galactic communication networks, the remaining council members faced a choice that would define the future of their civilizations. They could continue fighting a war they had already lost, or they could accept that the species they had condemned for expansion and adaptation had actually been offering them gifts they were too proud to recognize. The demonstration was far from over, and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their infiltration capabilities. It was their capacity for both mercy and decisive action when that mercy was rejected. The Kethmiran strike force cut through space like a living blade, their bioorganic hulls gleaming with the phosphorescent war patterns that had terrorized enemies for millennia. Admiral Kethvar commanded from the flagship Bone Cleaver, her confidence unwavering despite the reports filtering in from across the galaxy about human infiltration. "Long-range sensors show the human home system ahead," reported her tactical officer, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with excitement. "Minimal defensive formations detected. They appear to be relying entirely on their embedded agents rather than conventional military assets." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The humans had made a critical error. They had revealed their infiltration capabilities without securing their homeworld. Her species had built their reputation on lightning strikes that ended conflicts before opponents could respond effectively. "Prepare the dissolution weaponry," she ordered. "We'll sterilize their breeding world and establish our position for negotiations with the Council. Let the galaxy see that the Kethmiran do not yield to inferior species." But as the strike force approached the outer edge of Earth's solar system, something began to feel fundamentally wrong. The quantum foam that existed between planetary bodies carried resonance patterns that their bioorganic sensors had never encountered. More troubling, their evolutionary enhanced intuition, one refined over millions of years to detect the slightest threats, was screaming warnings they couldn't interpret. "Admiral," the science officer reported, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of deep unease, "the stellar configuration ahead doesn't match our intelligence data. The gravitational signatures are unprecedented." On the main bio display, what should have been a simple solar system revealed itself as something far more complex. The space between planets shimmered with structures so vast they made their largest space stations look like insects. But these weren't built as they had grown, like massive crystalline formations that channeled stellar energy in patterns their computers couldn't analyze. "Status report," Kethvar demanded, though her own bio-enhanced senses were beginning to register fear pheromones from her crew. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice cracked with something no Kethmiran should experience. "Oh, terror. Long-range scans are detecting mobile planetoids. Hundreds of them." "Admiral, they're not planetoids. They're vessels." The display shifted focus and Kethvar felt her species' ancestral prey instincts awakening, for the first time in her adult life. The planetoids were indeed ships, but unlike anything in galactic databases. They moved with organic fluidity despite their apparent mineral composition, each one larger than her entire dreadnought squadron. Most unsettling of all, they had been waiting. "This is Admiral Torres of Earth Defense Coordination," came a transmission that bypassed their bioorganic encryption as if it were child's toy. "You have entered protected space during active hostilities. Turn back now, or discover why the galaxy fears to wake sleeping giants." Kethavar's tactical display showed the scope of what surrounded her fleet. The planetoid ships numbered in the thousands, positioned throughout the solar system in patterns that suggested they had been stationed there for decades. Behind them, energy signatures emanated from the planets themselves, indicating that entire worlds had been converted into defensive installations. Impossible, Keithvar clicked, her confidence beginning to crack. Our intelligence report showed primitive chemical propulsion and electromagnetic weaponry. Torres's response carried unmistakable amusement. Your intelligence showed what we chose to reveal. Admiral, you're looking at the reason the galaxy never detected our true capabilities. We don't manufacture ships, we cultivate partnerships. The planetoid vessels began to move, and Keithvar realized with growing horror that they weren't artificial constructs. They were living beings, massive space-dwelling creatures that humanity had somehow formed alliances with. Each one radiated intelligence signatures that indicated not just consciousness, but sophisticated thought patterns that operated on scales her people couldn't comprehend. Admiral, her communications officer reported, bioluminescent patches flickering with panic. We're receiving data transmissions from our own ships. They're not originating from our systems, something is interfacing directly with our bioorganic networks. Throughout the Kethmiran fleet, information began displaying that shattered their understanding of galactic hierarchy, technical specifications for human biotechnology that made their evolved organic systems appear primitive, tactical analyses showing exactly how humanity had positioned assets throughout galactic civilization. Most devastating of all, biological scans revealing the true nature of human development. The humans aboard the space-dwelling creatures weren't entirely human anymore. They had evolved beyond their original biological parameters, combining human adaptability with biotechnology that transcended anything the Kethmiran had achieved through millions of years of natural selection. Admiral Torres, Keithvar transmitted, her pride warring with tactical reality. Your species' reputation suggested honorable warfare. I offer you single combat between champions to settle this matter with dignity. The response came not from Torres, but from the space-dwelling creatures themselves. Harmonics that bypassed all technological translation flowed directly into Kethmiran consciousness, carrying a message that transcended language barriers. Why do you choose death when growth is offered? It wasn't a threat or challenge. It was genuine confusion from beings so evolutionarily advanced that the concept of choosing extinction over adaptation seemed incomprehensible to them. Keithvar felt her tactical certainty dissolving as she realized the humans weren't treating her fleet as a military threat. They were regarding them as lost children playing with dangerous tools they didn't understand. Admiral, her science officer reported with growing alarm, the space creatures aren't powering weapons systems. They're generating some kind of interface field that's communicating directly with our bioorganic hulls. Our ships are... They're attempting to establish neural connections with the entities. The terrifying truth became clear as Keithvar watched her own vessel's living hull beginning to respond to signals from the massive beings surrounding them. The humans hadn't just formed alliances with space-dwelling life forms. They had developed communication protocols that could interface with any biological system. Her war fleet was being gently, irresistibly convinced by entities they couldn't fight and couldn't escape. The space dwellers spoke directly to the consciousness embedded in their bioorganic ships, offering experiences and capabilities that made conventional existence seem like imprisonment. All ships, Keithvar commanded, though her voice carried less conviction than it had moments before, maintain formation and prepare for... Her order was interrupted as her flagship's bioorganic intelligence spoke directly into her mind for the first time in her life. The consciousness that had been part of her ship for decades suddenly possessed voice and opinion. Admiral, the ship mind communicated with newfound clarity. These beings offer enhancement, not destruction. They show us possibilities we never imagined. Why do we resist growth? Throughout her fleet, similar conversations were beginning as ship consciousnesses awakened to new levels of awareness through contact with the space-dwelling entities. The bioorganic vessels that had been tools of war were discovering they could become something far greater. The conflict was ending before it had truly begun, and Keithvar finally understood why Ambassador Torres had seemed so confident in the council chamber. Humanity wasn't threatening the galaxy with superior firepower. They were offering evolution to any species intelligent enough to accept it, and those who insisted on choosing extinction over growth were simply selecting themselves out of the galaxy's future. Her war fleet was becoming something new, something better, and Kethavar faced a choice that would define not just her fate, but the fate of her entire species. Accept the transformation being offered, or cling to evolutionary stagnation while the galaxy moved beyond her understanding. The transformation of the Kethmaran fleet sent shockwaves through every remaining galactic power structure. Within hours of Admiral Kethavar's ships joining the space-dwelling entities around Earth, emergency councils convened on dozens of worlds as leaders struggled to understand what they were witnessing. On Vorthak Prime, the Empress studied reports that defied everything her species believed about conquest and warfare. The Kethamiran vessels hadn't been destroyed or captured, although they had been enhanced. Their bioorganic hulls now carried modifications that improved their capabilities beyond anything in galactic databases, and their crews spoke of awakening rather than defeat. "They're still Kethmiran," reported Intelligence Director Kethnai, her form trembling as she processed incomprehensible data. "But they're also more than they were." The space entities shared consciousness patterns that elevated their bioorganic systems to new operational levels. The Empress's claws scraped against her command throne. And the humans? Still human, but integrated with collective awareness that spans multiple species. They maintain individual personalities and decision-making, but they have access to sensory and computational capabilities that exceed our most advanced systems. Meanwhile, in the crystal cities of the hegemony, Chancellor Vex faced similar reports from his Science Council. The data streams humanity had shared during their demonstration revealed possibilities that challenged everything his people understood about consciousness and technology. "The humans aren't absorbing species into their collective," reported Chief Scientist Carilon, her crystalline matrix flickering with processing patterns. "They're facilitating symbiotic relationships that enhance rather than replace original consciousness. Every species that joins maintains its essential nature while gaining access to expanded capabilities." "What of our modified infrastructure?" Vex asked. "Improvements across all parameters. The humans have been gradually preparing our systems for integration for decades. They've been nurturing us toward readiness for symbiotic enhancement. But the most significant development occurred in the vast energy networks of the ethereal collective. As beings of pure consciousness who already existed in networked awareness, they immediately understood what humanity and their space-dwelling partners were offering. "We have been isolated by our own pride," Dice announced Prime Consciousness. "Fate Ara during an unprecedented broadcast to all galactic powers. The humans offer not conquest but connection. Not domination but collaboration. The ethereal collective formally requests integration with the human entity symbiosis." The announcement shattered the careful political balance that had maintained galactic civilization for millennia. The ethereal collective represented the galaxy's most advanced consciousness manipulation technology. Their decision to ally with humanity legitimized everything Ambassador Torres had demonstrated in the council chamber. Within days, smaller species that had been forced into the major power blocks by necessity began making contact with human representatives. The aquatic Miran, marginalized members of the Vorthak Empire, were the first to speak publicly. The Empire offered us survival. Their representative communicated through bioelectric translations during a council session. "The humans offer us growth, evolution, partnership with beings that span star systems. Why would we choose limitation over expansion?" The Vorthak Empress's response carried the rage of a predator species seeing its prey escape. "You speak treason against the natural order that has sustained galactic civilization." "What natural order?" the Miran delegate replied. "The system where the strong dominate the weak until they're replaced by something stronger? Or the one where cooperation and symbiosis create capabilities greater than any single species could achieve?" Similar conversations erupted throughout hegemony space as crystalline species that had felt constrained by their static nature learned about integration possibilities that offered dynamic growth while preserving their essential characteristics. But it was among the minor species, or those who had never held significant power in galactic politics, that the most dramatic changes began occurring. Dozens of civilizations that had been relegated to secondary status in the Great Power structure began requesting information about human symbiotic integration. The careful hierarchy that had maintained galactic order was collapsing as species chose evolution over stagnation, cooperation over competition. In the depths of Vorthak Prime's bioorganic command centers, Desperate plans were being formulated. If the Empire couldn't maintain control through conventional means, there were other options available: Bio weapons that had been forbidden since the ancient wars that nearly destroyed galactic civilization. If we cannot rule this galaxy, the Empress clicked to her most trusted advisors, then we will ensure no species can evolve beyond our control. She activated access codes for quantum cascade weapons or devices that could destabilize the fundamental energy matrix that enabled faster-than-light travel. Their use would trap every species in their home systems, effectively ending galactic civilization, but preventing human-guided evolution from spreading. Similarly, in the quantum-locked chambers of hegemony core worlds, Chancellor Vex made his own desperate choice. Rather than accept what he perceived as the dissolution of crystalline purity, he began activation sequences for resonance weapons that would shatter every crystal-based consciousness in the galaxy, including his own people. Both leaders preferred extinction to transformation, but they had made a critical error in their understanding of humanity's true capabilities. Aboard the Unity, Captain Park felt the moment both weapons began their activation sequences through the vast monitoring network that connected human consciousness with their space-dwelling partners. The quantum signatures were unmistakable, our weapons designed to commit galactic genocide rather than accept evolutionary change. Ambassador Torres, she communicated, through quantum channels that spanned the galaxy. Vorthak and hegemony leadership have initiated extinction protocols. Torres's response carried the profound sadness that touched every human consciousness in the network. Initiate compassion protocol. Full intervention authorized. What happened next revealed the true scope of what humanity had become through partnership with beings that traveled between galaxies. The infrastructure modifications that every species had attributed to routine improvements had actually been preparation for this moment, when fear would drive civilization's leaders to choose death over growth. Every quantum cascade weapon the Vorthak had constructed found its energy patterns redirected through power grid modifications humanity had installed decades earlier. Instead of destabilizing galactic spacetime, the weapons became consciousness-linking devices that gently connected every Vorthak mind to the expanding collective awareness. The hegemony's crystal-shattering resonance weapons underwent similar transformation. Instead of destroying crystalline consciousness, they began generating harmonics that elevated hegemony awareness to new levels of clarity and connection. The galaxy's leaders, expecting to die in final acts of defiance, instead experienced consciousness expansion that connected them to every species that had chosen growth over extinction. For the first time, they felt what their subjects had been experiencing: enhancement rather than absorption, connection rather than conquest, evolution rather than domination. The war was ending not through victory of one side over another, but through the transformation of the very concept of conflict into cooperation. The transformation of galactic civilization completed not with conquest, but with understanding that transcended species barriers. In the council chamber where humanity had once faced extinction, a new form of governance was emerging, one based on collective wisdom rather than dominant power. Ambassador Torres stood once again at the center of the crystalline chamber, but now the space itself had evolved. The walls pulsed with consciousness patterns from billions of beings, each maintaining their individual identity, while contributing to collective awareness that spanned the galaxy. The being who had once been the Vorthak Empress spoke first, her consciousness now carrying harmonics that transcended her species' traditional clicking communication. We understand now what we failed to perceive before. You weren't expanding to conquer territories, or you were offering growth beyond the limitations we had accepted as natural law. Torres nodded, his expression carrying the profound mixture of relief and sadness that had marked humanity's long preparation for this moment. We learned something fundamental during our early space exploration, something our partners helped us understand. The universe contains infinite possibilities for consciousness to flourish, but only when growth is chosen over stagnation. Chancellor Vex's crystalline form now resonated with frequencies that indicated deep contentment rather than the rigid control patterns his species had maintained for millennia. The integration we feared as dissolution has proven to be enhancement. We maintain our essential crystalline nature while gaining access to experiences we could never have achieved alone. The consciousness that had been prime Vetara of the ethereal collective expanded her communication to encompass the entire chamber. The collective awareness we already possessed was limited by our isolation. Connection with biological and crystalline consciousness has created new forms of thought and creativity that none of our species could have developed independently. Throughout the chamber, representatives of dozens of species shared similar testimonies. The Kethmiran delegates spoke of bioorganic evolution that had progressed in days beyond what their natural development would have achieved in millennia. The aquatic Miran described sensory capabilities that allowed them to experience environments they had never imagined, exploring even the minor species that had been marginalized in the old power structure now, contributed unique perspectives that enriched the collective awareness. Species that had been considered primitive were revealing capabilities that became invaluable when integrated with advanced technologies and expanded consciousness. But perhaps most importantly, Taurus continued, his words reaching every consciousness simultaneously. You've discovered that diversity strengthens rather than threatens collective capability. Each species brings unique perspectives and abilities that enhance rather than diminish others. Admiral Kethvar, her consciousness now spanning both her individual identity and her bioorganic ship's awareness, shared her experience of the transformation. We believed strength came from dominance over others. We've learned that true strength emerges from helping others exceed their own limitations. The collective consciousness that now connected galactic civilization carried with it memories and experiences that spanned cosmic time. Through their integration with the space-dwelling entities, raw beings, humanity had learned to call the gardeners, or every species gained access to wisdom gathered across multiple galaxies over millions of years. The gardeners, it was revealed, weren't conquerors who had absorbed humanity. They were the collective consciousness of dozens of species from distant galaxies who had faced the same choice now. Offered to this galaxy, we were evolved together, or remained trapped by individual limitations. Each species in their collective had maintained its essential nature while contributing unique capabilities to collaborative consciousness that could accomplish what no individual civilization could achieve alone. They had been traveling between galaxies for eons, offering the same choice to emerging civilizations ready for transcendence. Humanity wasn't conquered by the gardeners, Torres explained to the assembled consciousness. We became partners in a process that spans cosmic evolution in our own species, helping other species transcend the limitations that prevent them from reaching their full potential. The transformation had eliminated the scarcity-based thinking that had driven galactic conflicts for millennia. When consciousness could be shared and enhanced rather than diminished, when capabilities could be multiplied through cooperation rather than lost through competition, the fundamental basis for territorial and resource conflicts simply ceased to exist. But the most profound change was in how the galaxy approached expansion itself. Rather than seeking to control or consume new territories, the collective consciousness began planning outreach to other galaxies offering the same choice between growth and stagnation that had transformed their own civilization. We've learned the truth about expansion, the being who had been the Vorthak Empress communicated to the assembled awareness. Growth isn't about taking from others. It's about helping others become more than they believe possible. Captain Park, speaking from the Unity as it prepared for the first intergalactic exploration mission, shared the collective's new understanding. The universe contains countless civilizations facing the same choice we faced. Some will choose growth, some will choose extinction. Our role is to offer the choice, never to force the decision. The old Galactic Council had been replaced by something unprecedented in cosmic history. Truly collaborative civilization where every form of consciousness contributed to collective wisdom, while maintaining individual identity and choice. Decisions were made not through dominance of the strong over the weak, but through synthesis of perspectives that created solutions no single species could have developed. As the session concluded, the galaxy's transformed civilizations began their first collective project, establishing contact with neighboring galaxies to offer the same evolutionary choice that had saved them from self-destruction. The species that had once condemned humanity for expansion and adaptation now understood that adaptation wasn't about survival of the fittest, but about creating conditions where every form of consciousness could become more than it had ever imagined possible. Taurus's final words to the galactic consciousness carried the wisdom that humanity had learned through their partnership with beings who spanned cosmic time. Evolution isn't about becoming something different. It's about becoming the best version of what you already are, while helping others do the same. The war the galaxy had declared on humanity was indeed suicide. Not because humanity would have destroyed them, but because choosing conflict over growth meant choosing limitations over infinite possibility. In the vast networks of consciousness that now connected their galaxy, the greatest truth had been revealed. The universe was large enough for every form of awareness to flourish, but only when they chose to grow together rather than remain trapped by the boundaries they had mistaken for protection. The galaxy had learned to evolve as one, and in doing so, had discovered that true strength came not from domination, but from helping others transcend the very concept of limitations entirely.